right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's Wednesday, June 17th, 2020, and I'm back with another weekly edition of the Investing Systems Trading Service live show. Hope everybody's doing okay this morning. Watching the market, watching some of these stocks, and I'm going to dig into it here. Give me a second. All right. Getting all set up. Busy morning already. Here we go. So, taking a look at the S&P 500 here. I took a bunch of, I took everything off of my chart, basically. Nice clean view of it. Actually, this is, I like when I do the show, I like to use real nice, clean, open, high, low, close chart. This is my go-to chart usually when I'm looking through the market. This one, a couple other ones. So 200-day moving average, whether that's still relevant or not is a matter of opinion, I suppose, because for one thing, it's moving sideways here, right? It's kind of interesting. 200-day moving average is obviously it's one of the first things that people stumble across when they're learning technical analysis. And so, you always hear, buy above the 200-day, sell below it. But the funny thing is that basically when the 200-day moving average is just basically going completely sideways, it doesn't really indicate much of a trend, right? So there's lots of weird stuff. Like check it out. Here's the proverbial death cross, right? When the 50-day crosses down through the 200-day, and in the old days, that would be what they'd say is a sell signal. And quite frankly, recent years, there's been a couple of those, and the market just it usually indicates that the market's like extremely oversold when the market has a big sell-off, and then you can see the rally from that. So that's kind of useless. And whether that's because the 200 days just going completely sideways or not, who knows? But anyway, been a little volatility here recently. So let's see. Last Thursday, yeah. So there was last Wednesday. The market was kind of had this big run up and really got kind of extended, right? It was almost, I won't say parabolic, but it was extremely extended. And let's see one of these charts here. There we go. I think we looked at this. We looked at this last week, how the RSI got way up here into the 70s. So it peaked on Monday at almost 75 and then started fading a little bit. And then we got a down day, and it is what it is. And so here we are. And look at how that RSI made it all the way down to 50 there. So that's kind of interesting, kind of reset a little bit. So um, there's a couple of things on the chart. Let me go back to my original chart here. So if I draw a trend line sort of across these lows, where's my candlestick chart? There it is. Yeah, so this candlestick chart right here, this kind of fits pretty good actually. This trend line, and so obviously there's a kind of a big overhead resistance area up here. There's new highs. The news has been kind of driving the market. There's a lot of stuff going on. Yesterday, Jerome Powell was testifying in front of Congress, and I believe it continues today as well. And I think I'm trying to remember. There was another recent time where Powell was speaking, okay, it was last week. Yeah, there was last Wednesday. There was the Fed meeting. So anyway, it's kind of strange because the market kind of, Powell is not painting such a rosy picture of the economy, although he is saying that the Fed's going to do whatever it takes to support the economy. And so there was kind of, the market looked like it was going to sell off, and then there was like this stick save on Monday when they announced they were going to start buying corporate bonds, which is kind of interesting. And that sort of turned things around. But right now, the market just seems like it's sort of trapped between these highs and these lows. And I believe that Friday is options expiration day. So it won't surprise me to see it just sort of chop around in a range here. And I mean, yesterday was a pretty long range. We've had some long range days here, so the action's kind of picking up, and so it could go either way. And I have no idea which way it breaks out of this range. I personally never really thought that it would take this last leg up. I figured in this area here, and I mean, this just goes to show nobody really knows. You get these people on TV they're always, always assume that the market's just going to continue to go up forever all the time, and then when it pulls back, they say, well, now it's a buying opportunity. So, and that may very well be true, but anyway, the economy itself's got some pretty big issues coming up, and I figured this was like sort of the stall out spot. And the funny thing about that is this particular day here, like this, and I mentioned this last week, this entire rally, this entire last leg of the rally here kicked off based on one specific company, basically, hopes hopes for a COVID vaccine was what this was all about. And that kicked off this big sort of FOMO rally. And it seems to me that it just feels to me like, at some point reality is going to set in. That may be off a ways, right? The biggest thing, in my opinion, is the fact that so many businesses are struggling, right? And you don't hear much about it, but I could have sworn that I read like 100,000 businesses have already shut down or whatever, and small businesses, and this Fed announced they're starting their Main Street lending program, which is like they call it Main Street companies like with over 500 employees. A lot of weird stuff going on, and then of course, when the market goes up, you hear, "Hey, the market's not the economy." So anyway, um, be interesting to see what happens here. I'm gonna guess that for the rest of the week, that we probably stay trapped, in this sort of range right here. You never know, but it's kind of a news driven type thing, and so I mean the strength has been astounding considering what's really going on the ground. And so, and there's a couple things going on out there, like China and India are having a skirmish, and North and South Korea all of a sudden's a hot spot. And so you don't really hear much talking about it yet, but those are a couple of potential things that could spook the market in the short term. So anyway, basically like this low and this high are the reference points right now. And as I pointed out over here, S&P straddling the 200-day moving average. Nasdaq's kind of in its own world here. The Nasdaq 100, up at these highs here. That was a pretty nice little dip that it took there, and then bounced back. And so this looks a little vulnerable. Or at least for some backing and filling into here. Although I got to tell you, these prior dips here, every one of them got bought and it never looked back. And so we go to the SPY. Same here. I point this out. You get a few days of a dip, and then a couple of day dip up. And so you just basically had another dip there. And so it'll be interesting to see if. And a lot of it's going to have to do with, now all of a sudden they're talking about, wave two of the virus, and there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. So that's kind of spooking the market. And um, at the same time, you're hearing positive things. I think, it was retail sales yesterday bounced back pretty well. So It's hard to tell. Like day to day, the news just seems to get crazier and crazier, and so the market kind of goes through these little phases, and um, seems a little bit vulnerable, right? Because I mean, we've seen, we saw this pretty significant sell off here, and so bounced back a little bit, didn't quite close the gap, right? That's something. I'll tell you what. I look this 5 minute chart of the SPY here. This is some kind of wild stuff, right? Look at that. We had this gap down here. Had this gap down on Thursday, and then look at the angle. They just drove it down, and then we had a huge gap up on Friday, and a lot of whipsaw action, and then the big gap down on Monday, and then straight up all day, right? So today was like the smallest gap that we've seen in a while, but yeah, this is some kind of unusual price action if you ask me. And so go back over here, and yeah, these gaps are something. So anyhow, it'll be interesting to see how things play out today with Powell's second day of testimony. So a day like today, I mean, basically now we're inside yesterday, so a break over yesterday's high, I think would probably get a lot of people to jump on board and buy, and a fade down towards yesterday's lows would kind of turn the sentiment negative. So it is what it is. Um, so anyway, what I thought we would do here is take a quick look through the open trades, the pending trades, like we usually do. I got a couple that are triggering here today. Now this first one, is ENPH here. This is it closed over the trigger yesterday, right? The trigger was 52.75, and then let's look at this on a 5 minute chart here. 52.75. The official open today was 52.15, right? The high is only, and so hang on, I'm sorry, the trigger closed over the trigger yesterday. This is why I wanted to zoom in on a 5 minute chart. So this has not officially triggered, right? Because today it gapped down, and yesterday, hang on a sec here. Yesterday it just barely, whoop, wrong chart. It just barely, the close yesterday was 52.76, so like 1 penny, right? Hey, here's the thing, that I mean, the chart looked pretty good. The chart looked about right, and so this is why we wait for a close over the trigger, and then the next day, as long as it's trading over the trigger price, then it's valid. But so this morning it gaps down below the trigger price, like opens below it, and then it's going to sell down here, and so this is not actually triggered in. Does that make sense? That's exactly the way the system's supposed to work, and like what it's doing here is it's trying to, by the way that we sort of designed it, it's designed so that we don't get sucked into like a false move. So if it gapped down today and then pushed up and traded over the trigger price, well then of course it's valid, right? But and it's interesting how this stop is like really super tight here. So if it had triggered in, obviously, but so anyway, I wanted to make sure that everybody's aware of that, because for whatever reason they're selling it down big time here. So trigger price 52.75, closed by a penny over that yesterday, right? So that put it on the triggered today list, and like it says here, trades that close above the trigger price to officially trigger a buy, the high of the next trading session must be above the trigger price. And so this is not triggered in, and I don't know exactly what will happen. It'll come off the open trades for one thing, but I don't know exactly what'll happen, just because this stop is kind of meaningless. Like this would be the stop had it triggered in. And so I don't know if this will like just go back on the pending list tonight after the update or what. Anyway, so this is we don't see this too often. It's actually I can't remember the last time that we had one that was on the triggered today list that didn't actually trigger in. I can't even remember that. I mean, it's been a while. So anyway, let's take a look at the other one. All right, so both of these are kind of an anomaly. This one, when I marked this up last night, I thought to myself, of all the weird sort of things to happen, because this one would have just started to hit the pending list, right? With the idea that the stock was in a pullback, and then, in theory, it was going to pull back, consolidate down at these lower levels, and then turn back up. So you guys have been around for a while, and you know how this works. And so, stock's having a nice pullback, and then we expect some consolidation, and we expect, a cycle back up, like form the cup, pulls back, cups up, right? And so, anyway, here's what happened on this. Obviously, you can see that there must have been some news or something that caused this to just boom, gap up and sort of this is prematurely triggering in. That doesn't mean it can't scream higher, but I'll be honest with you. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens because the stop is going to go below, like, somewhere around the lows of the pattern. And so that's exactly what's happened here. And so theoretically this trigger price would have moved down, and then met the actual price, like, somewhere over here out in the future, under normal circumstances. But this is a little bit of an anomaly here just because of what the price did. So this is what the system was anticipating, would happen. Just typical setup. Stock, decent uptrend, has a pullback, reverses, forms the cup, catch it on the way up. And so, but every now and then you get this sort of weird anomaly type of thing like this. And so it is what it is. No big deal. I'd be, personally, a lot of times you can see a move like this, and that kicks off like a big move higher. Just real quick, let me look and let me look and see what the news was on this. I'm just curious because that's curious what the news is, because that's going to make a difference between whether this is viable or not. So let's see here. FOLD. Oh, I'm pulling this up on my other computer, by the way, because there's got to be some news here. Ba, 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 ba. I don't see any news. Huh. BTIG initiates coverage to buy. Price target 19. I'm not seeing any actual news that came out yesterday to account for that move. Huh. That's interesting. The only thing that I see is that this BTIG research upgraded it, right? And that was, yeah, buy rating reiterated at H.C. Wainwright. So I'm not really seeing any news on that. So that's kind of wild. There's probably something going on there. That's a big move right there. This thing was trading for, $11, and then boom, it gaps up to 12 and a half, 13. It seems to me that that there was something going on besides just an upgrade, but hey, you never know. So, and yeah, and I mean, so that's the only thing I see. BTIG Research initiated a buy, and that's today, huh? It says June 17th. So, interesting. Earnings are out of the way. Okay. Sort of an anomaly there, but I'd be inclined, I'll be honest with you, I'd be inclined to literally like protect this at yesterday's low if you were feeling froggy. And so anyway, long story short, EMPH hasn't triggered, didn't trigger, right? Didn't trigger in, and so anyway, I don't know, like tonight when we update, this will come off the open list because it never actually opened. It just the way that Jeffrey has a system is that they go ahead and they automatically get put on the open list at the same time they hit the triggered today list, just assuming that like 95% of them actually do trigger in. And so and this one was on the pending list with the trigger price up here, so it's an anomaly. So anyway, so with all that out of the way, we go to the open trades here, and so you can see how these two got added. But what I want to do is I want to go and look at the other two, four, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There were 7 open trades already. So and most of these are looking pretty good actually. So let me start with the oldest one here, the CTXS. What's interesting about this one is that it's got this sideways sort of range. It kind of had like a little bit of a cycle there, right? Formed the cup and rallied back up to these highs, but then it took another sort of dip down, and so the initial stop went in obviously like right here when it triggered in this day. Funny thing about this, when it triggered in here this morning, big long range up day, right? I mean, trigger was the open, I should say, was at 141.7, call it 142, and it closed at 148. So that was a big, nice pop right off the bat, and then faded all the way back down, and so that initial stop just stayed flat there. And so that's one of the cool things too about the system is that with the initial stop staying down there. Hang on for a sec. I gotta do something here. With the initial stop staying down there like that, if it had gotten moved up, it would have gotten knocked out. And so the system was basically sort of smart enough to hold on to that. Hang on for 1 sec. Sorry about that. I had stuff going on in my office here. All right. I think I took care of it. So there you go. The system, one more up day over here, this stop would have probably trailed up, and then it would have got knocked out. But so anyways, it was able to withstand this little bit of a pullback, and then we're getting another sort of cycle up. And so bigger scheme of things, there's a little bit of overhead resistance up here that it's going to need to get through. Still a pretty decent looking pattern, to be honest with you. Not a bad looking pattern at all. So, trading a little bit above right now, trading a little bit above the trigger price and looking pretty good. All right, moving up the list, you got another one that when we looked at this is the same sort of kind of anomaly thing. where it got triggered in prematurely, just like the one we looked at a couple of minutes ago, because the system was expecting, like, kind of a nice little sort of V bottom, catch it on the way up. And what happened was is that you get that huge big long range day up sort of out of the blue. Very similar to the one we looked at earlier. And you can see that took a little bit of after the long range day up, took a little bit of a pullback and is starting to come back up. And quite honestly, I mean, decent looking chart, right? As long as this rally sort of continues, is looking pretty good. I would imagine, I don't know about today, but a little bit more forward progress, and this stop will probably come up right under that pivot low right there. That would be my guess. Since it's below the trigger price still by a little bit here, not much, but well, a buck, a little bit less than a buck. This stop will probably stay there unless we get a little bit of forward progress over yesterday's high. So, and that's part of the idea. So, like we just looked at that previous one there. Just looked at the previous one there. You don't always want to have the stop too tight that it's just going to knock you out and the price is going to go on and do exactly what you expected it to do. So in theory, you could place a stop at 29 and a quarter right under there, but it's possible that it pulls back, hits that, and then takes off, right? So anyway, this stop is that's a pretty significant stop, but it's just based on it's based on the fact that it's a pretty volatile stock, right? It can make some pretty good moves. One of the things about looking at charts now is I look back at like March on a lot of these, and there's just so much haywire price action that happened back in March. Things are starting to smooth out a little bit. The charts are starting to be a little more coherent, which is a good thing. So, moving up the list, this Barrick Gold is just kind of chopping around in the vicinity of the trigger price. It still looks pretty, still looks halfway decent. It came really super close to the target up here, but no cigar. It looks like this day it gapped up, ran up a little bit, and then had one of those reversals. This day it gapped down, poked down a little bit, ran up, and so it's just kind of in a little sideways holding pattern here, just a little bit above, what the trigger price was. So it's not looking too bad. And, I can visualize like the big cup on this chart myself, right? Connect the lows, that pivot low and this other low right here. And so you can see that, theoretically the stock has sort of turned the corner, and obviously it could break down, but theoretically it looks like it's turned the corner here, broke that trend line, you got the pivot low, and so it's just consolidating this move, right? I mean, as long as and so the gold stocks, there's actually two of them on this list here, and they're kind of in their own world. They trade a little bit differently than your normal stocks, and so be interesting to see how they work out. Okay, let's look at Netflix here. Netflix is the next one. Interesting thing about Netflix, the initial stop still hasn't moved, right? 403.50. And so that's kind of interesting because Netflix, it and I extended this out. It actually triggered in over here, right? Triggered in what it triggered in like right there this morning. The morning of last Wednesday. I believe we looked at it last Wednesday, right? Talked about it. So last Tuesday it was on the triggered today list. Buy it right around the open the following day. Kind of all over the map a little bit. Had a little bit of a dip, and here it's kind of roaring back here, and so that's got a pretty good look to it. Got a pretty good look to it. There's your target up there, 455. And so, it's a little bit above the trigger right now, above the entry. So looking pretty good. And looks like it was going gangbusters earlier, but the market itself's kind of selling off a little bit here. I haven't looked at the news, but something has caused a little bit of weakness in the market. Oh, Powell's speaking again, I think. I don't know. These days where I do the show, on Wednesdays where I do the show, I'm not able to keep as close an eye on things as I normally do. So, anyways, Netflix looking okay here, right? I would expect, I would expect any forward progress to the upside, and this stop's going to come up right under that low, somewhere in that vicinity, somewhere in the vicinity of the low from a few days back, which makes sense. So, but again, here's a case where the idea is that when you get enough forward progress, past the trigger price, that's when the stop starts to trail up. But we want to keep that stop sort of wide enough, below the low of the recent pattern so that it doesn't get knocked out on normal volatility. And that's exactly what happened here. So if the stop had trailed up to like just under this bar, then it would have gotten knocked out. So this looks like some pretty decent forward progress. So it's going to be about the closing price too. Moving on, we have another gold stock, Newmont Mining, which is, and it's in a similar sort of holding pattern like Barrick Gold, right? Had a pretty decent little pullback and a trend line break here. Here we go. Decent little pullback, and unlike the other one, it almost didn't quite retest this low, but it did. But sometimes these trend lines, you guys been around for a while, know that first you draw like a steep trend line like that, and then a lot of times you end up drawing a trend line like that, right? You move that trend line sort of based on what the price action does. And so like at this point here, all we need is a little bit of strength here, and it's going to look pretty good. So that's just, it's just sort of how trend lines work, really. The steeper that you draw a trend line, the less valid it is, but the earlier you are to catching a trend line break. And then you get these cases where a stock basically will, something like this, a stock will break a steep trend line just by trading sideways, right? And so even this particular trend line here, if this stock just trades sideways for a couple of days, it's by virtue of that, it's going to break this trend line. So anyway, it's looking okay. It's hanging in here. That stop's still, let me double check it. Yeah, stop's still in the original spot that it was. Now that I've drawn this trend line, I can't grab my stop, but what I need to do is drag that over. So there you go. These stops don't always start and terminate at the exact spot they're supposed to, but anyways, I threw the whole thing off here. Let me just get rid of that. All right, so Newmont Mining not looking too bad. Consolidating here, looking for it to turn up. Here's the big winner right here. Look at this. And this one is about as good as it gets, right? That's about as good as it gets right there. The reason being that, so this particular day right here, we had this beautiful sort of sell-off here, and then this nice trend line break, and then this break right here, and so the entry would have been right there, literally like right there at the trigger price. And then, next day update, and then this big long range day, and look at that. So I'm sure there's some news right here. I'm sure there's some news going on with this QDEL, because this is This is a pretty explosive move right here, right? And look at that, hitting new highs here. So this sucker was up 26% as of yesterday's close. And it's up another 4% today. So this is, this is what they look like when everything seems to work out just right. So that was a beauty right there. And that's a huge move too, from these lows, just under 150 to up 215 bucks. Huge move. So, and then there's only one more left, and I hadn't looked at this one yet this morning. Yeah, there you go, mRNA. This is the one where last week when we were talking about this, I was actually talking about, um, and it didn't work that way. But what I was talking about was that if this thing actually like broke through the trigger intraday to the upside, this would be one that you might want to just go ahead and jump in like at the trigger price, right? Intraday. The reason being that it's an extremely volatile stock, and has these long range days. And so my thought was that you'd get something like this, where you had the trigger, and then it pushed through it, ended up closing way above it, and just exploding high. That didn't happen. It gapped over the trigger that day and closed below it, and then this day gapped over the trigger and then managed to close above it. So it's kind of a strange. But anyway, regardless, regardless, this is a pretty sweet looking pattern here. So this is a news driven stock, right? This is the stock that on this particular day kicked off the whole rally. On that day where it gapped up there, boy, what a move! But the volatility in this stock is amazing. So yeah, that stop's still hanging down here below the low of the pattern, and so it's kind of consolidating right here. Could go either way, right? It'll be interesting to see if the system trails the stop up. I get, you never know what's going to happen by the end of today, but it'll be interesting to see if the stop may come up. It may come up a little bit today. Hard to tell. It hasn't really moved too far away from the trigger price, although, at this point here now it needs to bust through these highs here, right? So, but all in all, this pattern right here is, similar to some of these other pullback patterns, and so there's a lot of potential here. A lot of potential. So, all in all, I'd say everything's looking pretty good. Um, and we got to see how this one stock didn't trigger in, so that was kind of instructive. Let's take a quick look around the pending trades and see if anything's setting up here. There's a pretty good list of pending trades here, so I'm just going to jam through them from the top down. IPHI, it's not looking too bad. Trigger price can be a close, basically like a close up. A close over like this area is going to trigger this in. That's got a pretty good look to it, actually. So, MDB, that's got a good look to it. I like the look of that one, actually. This might have been earnings or something right here. Yeah, theoretically, like this one would be, if this one closes up here, that's going to be triggered. The trigger price on this is 207, and so that's down. Yeah, it's like down here. Huh, interesting. This close right here was 208, but it wasn't on the list. So there you go. Now, so here's the thing. It's got to close over 207, and then tomorrow morning it has to trade over 207, right, for it to be official. And so there you go. But, not looking bad at all. Not looking bad. Tech stocks, QLYS. This is shaping up pretty good. It's got a nice little pattern to it. So it's got some work to do to look at that. look at that sell down and then that gap down, and a lot of times that's your, just like over here, that's your pivot low, and that sort of signals the reversal. Not quite yet though. Another weird thing is all these red days in a row, but this be an interesting one to keep an eye on. Let's see, 108 right now, and that can change too, by the way, right? Depending on what the price does, but as of right now, so you can see it's got to turn the corner and get something going to the upside. So in theory, it could continue to sell down, and then this can trail down, and then it could trigger in out in the future at a lower price. So you know how the system works. SWCH. Oh yeah, this has got a pretty good look to it. So here was the trigger on this last week when I did the show, right? Little pullback, started to turn. I drew the trigger price in there, and as you can see, it never triggered. It actually, just had sort of a little pop and then faded down, made a lower low. But so here you go. So yesterday it came within 1 penny of triggering. Right, it closed at 17.99. The trigger price is 18. And so there you go. So here's one that actually, in theory, and it depends. I mean, it looks like it got a little something going this morning, but if this thing fades and goes red, 18 18 is basically the barrier here, right? So it's got to close over 18 to trigger in. Pretty decent looking little pattern though. I mean, it looks like it's turned the corner and headed back up. It also looks like pretty volatile stock. So RGEN, this is a nice pullback underway. It's got some work to do to trigger in. I'll just draw like a crude entry there. So, so stocks like this happen, it could consolidate and then take another leg down. It could be headed down here. If it starts to turn the corner, then there's a lot of potential there. Right? Ideally, turns the corner and you get, pop like that, trades through there. So XLRN, not too exciting. A little pullback, a little consolidation. I suppose it could cut back up. Not too exciting at this point. This one looks like I drew the trigger price last week and still hasn't triggered in. Looking for a close over 43 here. I'm not sure what the it looks like it was close, but like close to triggering in, but no cigar. And so yeah, this one's got some potential here. So it's a good example of nice big uptrend, nice little sort of orderly pullback there, and then looking for a resumption of the trend. So decent pattern. That one's kind of interesting. Same thing here. Nice big run up, a little pullback, some consolidation, and then it's just a matter of whether it's going to turn the corner or not. So closing price, very important, because on some of these that's it'll poke above the trigger price, but it won't close above it. And a lot of times, that prevents us from getting in prematurely, right? It's all about that closing price. There's WPM, same sort of thing, right? We looked at this last week. There was a trigger, and so it hasn't. I mean, it's starting to turn the corner, but you can see, it came up, and then it's just been kind of hanging around there, and so so there you go. That's more like sometimes sort of like retesting the lows like this is a good thing, right? Nice solid little sort of base right there for it to work off of. And so let's see, WPM 41, or I'm sorry, 3880. Yeah, so it's actually, I'm sorry, not 30, 4140. So let me move this up here. All right. Yeah, like I said, this could potentially be a case where the trigger price actually moved up instead of down. That's what it looks like to me, and it kind of makes sense because that high right there, that's sort of like the pattern high, and so it looks to me like the original trigger was a little closer to the high 40s, and then with this weird sort of bar that day, price bar. Um, now it's got to get through. Now it's got to get through that. So that makes a whole lot of sense, to be honest with you. Anyway, 4140 is the price to beat. Got to get a close over that, and a close over, and so that could come down too, right? A couple more days goes by, and this high won't be as relevant, and so it won't surprise me to see this come down after a couple of days, like kind of back where it was. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. The problem is there's already two open precious metals stocks, and so you don't really want to. And I mentioned this like a couple of weeks ago when these were all on the pending, that you don't really want to overdo it in one particular sector. The pending list has got a couple of biotech stocks, a couple of biotech stocks, a couple of a few tech stocks, and a couple of precious metal stocks. This is one of them, and here, the next one here is FNV. That's a pretty decent looking little pattern too, sort of. I mean, I look at this and I see like what looks almost like a topping pattern, right? But then again, sometimes your topping pattern turns into just a nice sort of pullback channel like that, and then so you get the run up, you get the pullback, and then the trend resumption after the pullback. So not too exciting. Last but not least, look at the marks I had on this. That's interesting. With the way that the market's been acting so crazy, you have these sort of outlier days, and so as of last week, this was a trigger price, and then you can see this particular day how it gapped up, faded down. So let me take this little pattern off of here because it didn't really manifest that way. And let's see, Luminex trigger price 30.75. Well, that's interesting. So there you go. That's interesting. That's kind of interesting. So it's kind of more of a sideways type thing than anything. Not extremely exciting. I mean, obviously, you got a pretty decent consolidation here, and so in theory, this has been a really strong stock too, right? A lot of craziness over here in March, but this has been a really strong stock, and so theoretically, it would not take much to out of this consolidation. And I'll tell you another interesting sort of thing is like you got that low, and then you got sort of the corner being turned right there. So there you go. Yeah, so this one more than anything, and then my guess would be that that if this triggers in, like if this gets a rally and starts to do something, then that stop would just go right down here below, right down here below the low of this pattern. Now I've seen a few of them where it's not actually below the lowest low; it's a little bit above that. The stop could actually be down here about 29. So keep that in mind. It's probably not well. In like 99% of the cases, it's not a good idea to try and front run these things, assuming that like this would be one where like you could look at this and say, hey, boy, there's a lot of potential here, and so you could think about trying to jump in intraday as it's pushing through the trigger. But from what we've seen lately, with all this crazy gapping up and gapping down, and like the one today we looked at, that's not actually triggering in because it gapped down at the open and is selling off big time. So we're probably not in the environment to try and take these entries intraday. Best thing to do is pick. And I've seen like about three on this pending list. If I jam back through them real quick, which I'm not gonna do, but I can go through these charts like really quick and pick out like my top three, and then put those on a watch list and keep a really super close eye on them. This one's got a pretty good look to it, right? Not a bad look at all, because this can be a pretty explosive stock. The interesting thing about this is how the daily bars, even during this run up, the daily bars like overlap big time. You see that on some stocks, and on others you don't. But it's kind of interesting how just a lot of overlap on a day-to-day basis. And it makes it a little bit trickier, but anyway, I see some potential on this one. You know, Not a bad look to it. I'm trying to remember. I said I wasn't going to do this, but yeah, there you go. So this one is basically, this is like sort of triggering in right here. That's what I wanted to see. There's a couple of these. All right. There's a couple of these that, there you go. That's another one right there. So I'm thinking that a couple of these stocks will, well, this one's sort of right on the edge here. You can see that fade there, but so there may be a couple of new open positions after the close today, so we'll just have to see. All right, double back real quick here. Just as I sort of suspected, we're just kind of hovering there. It looks like as we speak, they're trying to bid it back up a little bit. So there was kind of a nasty sell off at like 10:15. Maybe it was something Powell said. On the intraday chart, I'm kind of seeing like today's 5-minute chart. It's like lower high, lower high, lower high, and so it's kind of drifting down. And it looks like they're buying the dips but less aggressively. So big scheme of things. With Friday being options expiration day, there's always a lot of, which I suppose you could call, tomfoolery that goes on, and leading up to options expiration. A lot of times, if you have a weak market, it's stronger than normal going into options expiration, or the market kind of gets held up, artificially, like levitated, I should say, kind of held up ahead of options expiration. If it's acting like it wants to sell off big time, um, and then the other thing is that a lot of times you'll see a lot of sideways sort of chop and just grind, and sort of nothing happening, leading into options expiration, right? Like they kind of hold it in place, and with the idea that the options sellers, which are the big institutions, I would imagine, sell options, and their number one goal is to make as many options expire worthless as possible. Is that the way they get 100% profit on the premium they collected? So, headed into options expiration day, you got, oops, I should probably delete these off of here. Nothing worse than having a couple of lines on a chart. So anyway, yeah, I mean we're just trapped in a range right here, and quite frankly, the market is right smack in the middle of this extremely wide range. That's a big range right there, and so right smack in the middle of it, and who knows which direction they'll decide to take it. So it'd be interesting if we had a complete inside day here, inside yesterday. But so it is what it is. Get some, kind of. There's a lot of excitement and interesting stuff going on with individual stocks, and so that's what's important, anyways. The individual stocks. So, anyways, keep an eye on the ones that are pending there, and I will see you back here next